Marcus Webb had exactly one dress shirt without a stain on it, and he was wearing it. He had pressed it himself at 5:40 in the morning, Lily still asleep, the iron pulled from the hall closet where it had lived untouched for 2 years because there had been nowhere to wear it and no one to wear it for. He stood in the ballroom of the Ashwood Grand with his hands clasped in front of him and watched $800,000 in crystal chandeliers push light across the ceiling. And he thought about the 43 days remaining until the bank called the note on his father's shop. He was not supposed to be here. He had a parking pass, a third-floor service badge, and a crate of hand-tooled conference chairs in a freight elevator, 12 of them, commissioned by the Ashwood's events director 8 months ago and due tonight. He had delivered chairs to this building a dozen times. He had never been inside the ballroom. He did not know, standing at the edge of it with his dress shirt and his service badge and 43 days left in his pocket, that the woman who was going to change everything was standing 40 feet away, refusing to look at the door. Catherine Voss had controlled the room from the moment she entered it. That was not arrogance. That was architecture, 20 years of deciding exactly where to stand and what her face would do when people arrived, so that they would feel chosen when she turned toward them and unnoticed when she did not. She had spent this morning dismantling the board of Meridian Capital in a conference room on the 42nd floor of her own building, removing the firm's largest internal shareholder with 7 minutes of documented evidence, an emotion that passed 12-1. And she had driven here directly because Marcus Holt, the man she needed in this room tonight, the man whose $200 million made Voss Industries viable for the next 3 years, was standing beside the bar drinking scotch and waiting for someone to make him feel like the decision to invest in her had already been made. She was going to make him feel that. She had done it before. She was good at it. She was standing at the edge of the room now, because she had not eaten since 7, and the room was too warm, and her chest was doing the tight thing it did sometimes when she had won something large, and the winning felt like it was supposed to feel like more. The door opened. A hotel events coordinator in a headset gestured toward the freight access. A man in a dress shirt came through carrying nothing, and Catherine noted him the way she noted service staff efficiently. Once, then not again. His hands were wrong for a dress shirt. She caught that even at 40 feet. The calluses at the base of his fingers, the faint staining along his right thumb from something that hadn't fully come out. A craftsman. A vendor. Someone who had business here tonight that was not the same as her business here tonight. She looked away before he looked up. Marcus had not planned to be in the ballroom for longer than the time it took to confirm delivery, but the events coordinator was on her radio, and the freight elevator was stuck between floors, and there was a chair out of alignment at table 12, and she needed him to look at it. He was looking at it. The chair was a dining chair, walnut-framed, with a hand-stitched leather seat he had cut himself from a side of Italian cowhide ordered by the client 8 months ago. It was not one of his. He crouched to look at the base, not a structural problem. The floor was uneven beneath the carpet. He took a business card from his jacket, folded it twice, pressed it under the rear left foot, stood, pushed the chair, sat in it briefly, stood again. Level, he turned to tell the coordinator. Catherine Voss was 3 feet away. She had not moved to approach him. She had arrived there following the coordinator, who was now being pulled back toward the entrance by her radio. They were alone in the relative quiet of the table setup, and Catherine was looking at the chair, then at him, and then at his jacket pocket where the business card had come from. She said, "That's not your chair." She meant it as an observation, but it came out as an accusation, which was a different thing, and she heard the difference after she said it. "No," Marcus said. "It's yours. The floor's off." He looked at her hands, at the phone in her right hand, at the ring she was not wearing on her left hand because there had been one there and now there wasn't, and he looked back at the chair. He had delivered these chairs 8 months ago. He knew what they felt like to sit in. "Try it," he said. "Or don't. It'll hold either way." She sat in it because she could not sit in it after that, and the chair held, and it was level, and it was, she registered somewhere under the calculation she was always running, extremely comfortable. She stood up faster than she needed to. She was going to say something efficient and move away, and then she heard the sound. Under the table. The adjacent chair on the right was doing it a faint, irregular contact sound, the kind that had no business existing in a piece of furniture in this price range. She would not have noticed it if she hadn't just sat in perfect stillness for 4 seconds. Marcus crouched, his head tilted left, and was quiet. 2 seconds. He said, "Your joinery on the rear rail is separating. The dowel's been loose for a while. Maybe since it was packed." He looked at the underside for another second without touching it. 4 months of weight cycles would explain the play in the sound. It hasn't failed. It will if someone heavy sits in it for the full dinner service. Catherine said, "You can tell that from the sound?" She had not intended to say it. It escaped before she made a decision about it, and she did not finish the sentence, because the sentence had been heading somewhere like how, and she knew how sounded naive, and she had not been naive in a professional context since she was 26 years old. She stopped. The question hung in the air between them. Marcus did not answer the question she hadn't finished. He said, "Which chair is this for tonight?" She pulled up the seating chart on her phone. She showed him. He looked at it without touching her phone, and said, "Move him to 11, and pointed without looking at her, and walked toward the service hallway to get his tools. He had a concrete reason to stay. Her question was still hanging. Marcus's daughter was named Lily. She was 6 years old, and her hair was always doing something specific. In the morning today it had done a thing where one side was flat from sleep, and the other side had made a decision, and she had brought to the hotel, in her coat pocket, a small brass compass that she held sometimes the way other children held stuffed animals, which was by one arm pressed to her side as though it would otherwise escape. The compass had been her mother's. Elena had carried it on every job site in the year before the accident, because, she had told Marcus once, she always felt like she was about to get lost. The irony of that was not something Marcus had let himself think about for approximately 2 years. Lily had found it in a box 3 months after, and had carried it every day since, because she had decided, on her own, that it always pointed home. She had told Marcus this the morning she started carrying it. He had set down his coffee and not picked it up again for a long time. Lily was not at the Ashwood Grand tonight. She was at the house of Marcus's neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, asleep by 8, and Marcus had texted at 7:42 to confirm this, and received back a photo of Lily on the couch, with her coat still on, and the compass in her hand, and her eyes fully closed. He kept his phone face up in his jacket pocket tonight because of that photo. The shop was his father's shop. Webb Custom Woodworks, established 1981, a long, low building off Route 7 in Belden that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil and 40 years of particular pride. His father had run it until his heart had made a decision in 2019, and Marcus had taken it on without pausing to consider whether taking it on made financial sense, because it was not a financial decision. It was the only decision. The building was paid for. The equipment was paid for. The debt was newer than that accumulated in the 18 months after Elena died, when Marcus had run the shop at reduced capacity while figuring out how to be a father alone, and the jobs had thinned, and the accounts payable had not. And then there had been a note from Penfield Community Bank, citing a balloon payment of $214,000, due on the 43rd of the next 43 days. He knew this number the way he knew the sound of a failing dowel. Marcus was in the service hallway with his tool bag when he heard the ballroom filling up. He had fixed the chair. He should leave. The events coordinator had told him where the exit was. He had his freight parking ticket. He was standing in the hallway instead, looking at the opposite wall, because something was pulling at him a specific familiar discomfort, like standing in a room where the floor is not quite level, but you haven't found the spot yet. Catherine moved through the room with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades. She said the right things in the right order to the right people. She was finding Marcus Holt. She found him at the bar, precisely where she'd expected him, and she turned toward him with the full weight of her attention and said his name and watched his face open up, because it always did when she chose someone. He was 62 years old and worth $1.4 billion, and he still opened up when she chose him. She had 20 minutes before the dinner began. She started talking. She was 8 minutes into it when she saw the dress shirt again at the edge of the room. Marcus had not meant to stay. He had meant to go to the exit. He had ended up back at the ballroom entrance, watching, because the room had the particular quality of rooms that know they contain something important, and he was trying to identify what was pulling at him. He watched the woman from table 12. He watched the way the man she was talking to was being slowly committed to something without knowing it. He had seen that technique before. He had been on the receiving end of it twice, years ago, in rooms much larger than this one. His jacket pocket held, beneath his phone, a card. It was not a business card for Webb Custom Woodworks. It was a much older card worn at the corners, the weight of it heavier than modern cardstock from a time before Belden, before Lily, before the shop. He carried it because Lily had found it in the same box as the compass, and had given it to him without knowing what it was, and he had not put it back in the box because it felt like the kind of thing you don't put back. The card said, Marcus D. Webb, Senior Structural Analyst, Voss Industries Infrastructure Division. The embossed logo at the top said Voss. The logo was the same as the one on the conference chairs he had delivered tonight. Catherine Voss had been running a company bearing her family name for 11 years. She had been running it alone, her father's company, restructured after his death since she was 31. She was good at it the way a person is good at something they had no choice but to become good at. She had not been inside the Voss Infrastructure Division office since her father's funeral. She had transferred that division to a contracted management firm 3 months after she took over. She had never reviewed the personnel records from the year before the transfer. She had never had a reason to. She did not know that 2 years before he died. Her father had hired a structural engineer from a Federal Highway Administration post to lead a safety review on their largest infrastructure contract, or that the review had produced a 200-page suppressed report, or that the engineer had resigned 6 months before the contract site collapsed that killed 3 workers, one of them named Elena Webb, or that the woman who had died had been Marcus's wife and Lily's mother, and the person who always felt like she was about to get lost, and had carried a brass compass to every job site because of it. Catherine did not know any of this standing at the bar talking to Marcus Holt. Marcus knew all of it. What he did not know, what he had spent 2 years believing the opposite of, was that Catherine Voss had known it too. He had spent 2 years believing the silence after Elena's death was calculated, that the daughter had inherited the suppression along with the company, that the woman at the top of Voss Industries had looked at his report, looked at the site, and made a choice about what was worth protecting. He was wrong about this. He would find out later, that he was wrong. But he didn't know that yet. He was standing at the edge of the ballroom when the side door opened and Garrett Sloan walked in. Garrett Sloan wore his money the way certain men wear a weapon, not to use it, but to ensure that everyone in the room knew he could. He entered mid-sentence, finishing a phone conversation that may or may not have been real, and he crossed the ballroom floor with his hand already moving toward his left cuff to straighten it once. Precisely the way you adjust something that doesn't actually need adjusting, but that your hands have learned to do when entering a room where you intend to dominate. He did this entering every room. He had done it in Marcus's shop 6 weeks ago, when he'd come to offer a discounted acquisition, your building, your equipment, your father's name, for a number Marcus had looked at and then looked away from, because the number had been structured to feel generous and was not. Garrett had gotten the banknote date from someone. Marcus didn't know how. He knew that Garrett wanted the Route 7 property because it bordered his development parcel, and the combination of the two would unlock a zoning variance worth 3 times what the shop was worth. He knew that Garrett expected the clock to handle it. Garrett crossed to Catherine, who had finished with Holt and was moving toward the dinner tables, and he said, loud enough for the adjacent table to hear, "Catherine, I see your furniture arrived." He glanced in Marcus's direction. "Is this the help you've been working with?" Catherine said, "Marcus Webb. He's the craftsman who built the chairs." Garrett straightened his left cuff. "Of course he is." He smiled at Marcus. "Beautiful work. For furniture." He paused just long enough. "Will you be staying for dinner? Or are the service exits this way?" Marcus looked at Garrett with the same expression he used when diagnosing a failing joint, specifically interested. Nothing extra. He said, "The infrastructure review your firm submitted to the Penfield Zoning Board in August. The one that used the Cayman account listed under your wife's maiden name, Sloan Fairfax, to route $340,000 to the Planning Commissioner's Administrative Trust between February and September of last year." He paused. "The account number is in the transfer records. The transfers match the authorization pattern you used on the Riverside development in 2021. The State Comptroller's Office has had a standing interest in that pattern for 14 months. He said it at the same volume he would use to identify a supplier. He said it looking at Garrett's face. He said, "You should probably talk to your attorney before the comptroller does." He said, "I need to return a tool bag to my truck." He picked up his tool bag from the floor beside the table and walked toward the service exit. He did not look at Garrett again. Garrett's left hand had stopped moving. The cuff was where it had been when he entered. He did not straighten it. He did not say anything. He looked at Catherine, and Catherine looked at the space Marcus had just left, and then the sound went out of the room for Garrett Sloan, the way pressure leaves something when the seal fails, not explosive, not dramatic, just total and permanent and quiet. He left. He did not look back from the door. Catherine stood in the stillness for one full paragraph of narration. The bar was 30 feet away. Marcus Holt was watching her from beside it. The chandeliers were doing what they had been doing all night. She was trying to locate the part of herself that knew what to do in the next 30 seconds, and it was not where she had left it. She found Marcus Webb in the parking structure on level 2. Loading his tool bag into the back of a dark green pickup that had one rust spot above the rear wheel well. She had looked him up on her phone between the ballroom and the elevator. She had found a 3-year-old LinkedIn profile, a Federal Highway Administration press release from 8 years ago, and a corporate directory entry from Voss Industries' infrastructure division, the latter of which had loaded and then not loaded, and then loaded again. And by the time the elevator reached level 2, She understood what she was looking at and what it meant, and she was not certain she had any right to be in this parking structure at all. She said, "You worked for my company." He said, "Yes." She said, "The suppressed review." He said, "Yes." She said, "I didn't know it existed." He looked at her. His hands were on the tailgate, not moving. He looked at her the way he had looked at the chair specifically, without urgency, assessing something real. He said, "I know that now." She said, "How long have you known?" 6 hours, he said. "I pulled the board minutes on my phone before dinner." He shut the tailgate. "Your father buried it. The management firm extended the burial. You inherited the policy without inheriting the decision." He looked at the concrete pillar beside his truck. "I've been angry at you for 2 years for something you didn't do." She said, "Tell me the rest." He took her to the corner of 5th and Morrison, 3 blocks from the Ashwood Grand, because that was where the construction fence was, the last remaining section of the Voss infrastructure project, still fenced, because the lot had never been cleared and redeveloped after the inquiry closed. It was 11:15 at night, and the street was quiet, and the fence had a plastic caution sign zip tied to it that had been there long enough to fade. He stood on the sidewalk outside the fence with his hands in his jacket pockets and told her the rest in the same flat register he used for everything. The review, the report, the 200 pages, his resignation, Alina's continued employment with the subcontractor, the day in October, the call he had not been in time to answer. He told her the facts. He did not perform the grief. He stated it the way you state a measurement. This is the dimension of the thing. She understood that this was the only way he knew how to carry it out in the open. She did not say she was sorry, because sorry was the wrong word, and they both knew it. She said, "What do you need?" She meant it as a practical question. She was good at practical questions. It was the only thing she trusted herself to say. He said, "The report should be public. The families on the project deserve that, and the shop stays open." He said it the same way. "I have 42 days. She said, "The zoning complaint against Sloan goes to the comptroller tomorrow. I know the review director." She said it without looking at him, looking at the fence. "The report, I'll release it through our legal team with a full statement by end of week. My signature on it." She paused. "The $214,000 is a problem I can solve in 48 hours if you'll let me." He said, "That's a lot to offer a man you met 2 hours ago." She said, "I met you 2 years ago." She looked at the fence. "I just didn't know it." He stood beside her looking at the faded caution sign and the dark lot behind it, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, and the hand that was near her hand did not move. 6 months later, Lily Webb was 7 years old and had opinions about everything, which was new, and had started calling her teacher by her first name, which was not technically allowed, but which Marcus had decided to address on a different day than today. She was in the backyard of the house on Route 7, running in a large circle for reasons she had not explained, the brass compass held out in front of her like a divining rod, narrating something to herself in a voice too quiet to hear from the kitchen window. She had done this 3 times this week. Marcus was watching from the kitchen and not questioning it because she was laughing. The shop was still his father's shop. It had 3 new bays now the Route 7 zoning had resolved in February. The expansion contract with the county had come through in March, and there were 2 apprentices from the vocational program who came on Thursdays and Fridays, and whom Lily had decided needed better lunches than they were bringing. and had told Marcus so with considerable specificity. The foreclosure notice was gone from the wall where it had lived for 11 months. In its place was a framed copy of the structural report, not for display, but because Lily had found it on his desk and said it looked important, and he had agreed that it was. The press release had gone out in November. The families had received it. There had been letters. He had read every one at the kitchen table at night after Lily was asleep, and each time he had set whatever was in his hand down and not picked it up again for a long time. Catherine's office on the 42nd floor still had the same floor plan, but the curtains were open now. They had been closed for 11 years before November, and she had opened them the morning after she signed the release statement. And the light that came in was very specific, and she had stood in it for longer than she had time to stand in it. The pot on her kitchen stove, the one in the apartment she had moved into in January, because the other place had been too large for one person, and she had finally admitted this had been put there by her own hands, and it contained soup that was not very good, but that she had made without consulting anyone, and she considered this progress. She had called Marcus 4 days after the parking structure. Practical question: did he need the legal team's help filing the suppressed report with the appropriate state agencies, or did he have counsel? He had said he had a friend in environmental law and he would be in touch. He had been in touch. The friend in environmental law had been Garrett Sloane's former attorney, which was a detail that had made Catherine laugh out loud on the phone, a short, involuntary sound that she did not entirely recognize, and Marcus had said nothing for a moment, and then said, "Lily says people laugh when something is both terrible and correct." And Catherine had said, "Your daughter is right." And after that, the calls had not always been about legal logistics. Some things you don't name because naming them changes their shape. Some things the people around you name for you. Lily had been calling her Kate for 3 months, which was a name no one had ever used, and Marcus had said once that Lily didn't use names she hadn't decided on herself, and Catherine had said she knew, and that had been all either of them said about it. The things we protect most fiercely are sometimes the things we can't yet name, and sometimes the person standing at the wrong end of someone's contempt is carrying the truth they most need to hear. If you know someone who has quietly kept their integrity intact when it would have been so much easier not to share this with them, subscribe for a new story every week, and tell us, if you discovered that your silence had cost someone everything, would you make it right when the cost of making it right was your own company's reputation? Or would you protect what you'd built? Drop your answer below. We read every one.